As we've been thinking about green jobs and from a macro level, especially at the government level, the question then becomes, what are the countries, what are the kind of factors that are going to enable the creation of green jobs? My name is Sellah Bogonko, co-founder and CEO Jacob's Ladder Africa, and this is Green Jobs Africa. For us at Jacob's Ladder and here at Green Jobs Africa, there are 5 enabling factors that will increasingly or will create a more rapid growth in the green economy sector and specifically in the creation of green jobs. And the first one is political goodwill. Like I mentioned in a previous episode, one of the challenges that has been faced by the current push in the climate change space is that there's just no sufficient political goodwill. What exactly do I mean by that? I mean that if your political leadership is not aligned towards addressing the issue of climate change, it will be very difficult for the business environment, for the policies in that environment to be implemented, because the absence of political goodwill is what frustrates or does not enable the other factors that I'm going to be mentioning shortly. So the need for political goodwill cannot be overstated. The recently concluded Africa Climate Summit is a great example where you see African nations actually rising and saying we do have solutions. And that was largely driven by the political class, leaders, presidents, prime ministers, heads of state from different countries, not just in Africa, but from different parts of the world, converging and convening to be able to say that we do need to do something about the issue of climate change. But seeing our very own head of state addressing the issue already creates that kind of momentum that enables the other sectors to also begin to play a role. And that brings me to the second point. While you could have political goodwill, it has to be matched with the right policies, because you could have great political goodwill, support for climate action, and the right understanding as far as addressing the issue of climate change. But in the absence of enabling policies and enabling laws, it could be very difficult to achieve anything in the first place. And this kind of enabling laws could be, what are the laws around investments? How are we encouraging, for example, new technologies like direct air capture or new technologies in the climate smart agriculture space? How do we reduce the use of harmful pesticides and fertilizers and introduce the use of organic and regenerative practices that enable farmers to reap a lot more from what they're putting in terms of their farms right now, and enable them to be able to not just feed their families, but be able to export and earn from their livelihoods? Enabling policies play a big role, not just in terms of enabling the population of a country, but they also result in the GDP, the economic performance of a country. If we have laws that are regressive, for example, or laws that contribute adversely to the investment climate, it could directly affect the performance of the country economically, but also reduce or impact the number of jobs that could be created. One of the examples I'd like to emphasize is in the direct air capture space or sector that is emerging. Kenya is already leading, but the emergence of a law that would discourage many of the investors to put their money in that space, while you could have the competitive advantage in terms of our Rift Valley, our youthful population, the willingness of investors, the absence of the right policies could make us miss that opportunity, because the truth is some of the competitive advantages that we have may not necessarily be, that may not be the case for too long. And so we do need to do something and address that as soon as possible. The third thing that would enable the creation of green jobs in a country is the education system. It's evident that climate change as a whole is an emerging sector. As we did in a past episode, we saw that even the push around nations and then finally coming to the place where they agree that it's an issue that needs to be dealt with has only just increased in the recent past. But that means that many of the countries, and especially in the global south, do not have the requisite curriculums to be able to address the issue of climate. How many young people know what climate change is? How many young people know what carbon markets are? How many young people know what carbon sequestration is? We are trying our level best to do the kind of training and designing curriculums, which are exciting projects that we're working on, and getting as many young people as possible trained in the area of climate. But this would be significantly increased if there was partnership with the likes of government and other institutions to be able to make sure that climate literacy is mainstreamed within the education sector. And for as long as it's a competitive advantage for us as Africa, the absence of information could definitely be to our detriment. And so creating a system, an education system that enables as many young people as possible to both know and to be enabled to participate in that space is needful. Number 4 that would enable the creation of green jobs is data, the availability of data. It's been said many times that there is an absence of data, especially aggregated data in the African space. But in my view, in the recent past, I found that that is not necessarily so. The challenge is that there could be data, but it's not available in the form that would make sense to anybody. There's requirement of too much effort to be able to make sense of it, enough to either create a policy or to inform decision making or even interventions that are needful, especially in different sectors, but more specifically in this case, in the climate change space. So how do we improve data creation, especially in this age of AI? We do need to leverage the emerging technologies to increase our access to data and our use of data in making decisions. And again, one of the projects that we are working on as Jacob's Ladder Africa is a project around the creation of an index that would enable many countries to know where are the jobs, how many are they? What sectors are actually generating the most jobs right now? And in the future, 5 years from now, what will be the sector that will be most demanding in terms of jobs? And how do we ready our young people towards that? And it's needful. And hopefully that, once we are done with this particular instrument, it will be able to enable many countries to improve their interventions when it comes to creation of green jobs. And finally, but definitely not least, is climate finance. One of the things that we have spoken about many times over is that the absence of climate finance makes it impossible for businesses to be able to thrive in the creation of green jobs. Access to loans or access to finance that enables them to, for example, invest in renewable energy, or young people who have brilliant ideas but have no access to climate finance literally stifles their creativity. So there is a need to increase not just the availability, but to diversify the kind of finance that is needed, or to diversify the kind of instruments of finance that can be accessed by different categories of people. Women, young people, they're differently and disproportionately affected by climate change. So how can they access finance that would enable them to play a role in the green space? Young people who have brilliant ideas need to be able to have access to low interest finance or de-risked finance that enables them to be able to generate ideas or implement ideas that will enable them to create jobs for themselves and for other people. Governments, even as African heads of state, have been pushing and championing, and also back to the Bridgetown agenda. The idea is, can governments access finance to enable them to develop in a climate resilient way? Finance is one of the major enablers when it comes to creation of green jobs. And so I hope that you've been able to be informed to know, first of all, whether what you're doing is green or not, and that you know what category you're in. Are you in the core green jobs? Are you in the enabled green jobs, enabling? Or are you in the emerging sectors like fashion, as I mentioned earlier? And then I hope you've known, especially for the government and the policy makers, I hope you've known that there are certain areas that could help countries to develop faster, especially for African countries. We could address the issue of youth unemployment if we invested a lot more in these areas and address these factors that are definitely triggers towards the creation of green jobs. So you're probably seated at home or watching this from somewhere and you're asking yourself, so how do I transition from where I am? I now know that I'm in a gray or brown job. How do I transition from this into the next one? Stay tuned for that, because we're going to be starting to break this down. As we mentioned in a previous episode, we said that there are 5 leading emitters in terms of sectors that are the largest emitters. And those are the very same sectors that are producing the jobs because of the transition. And so we're going to be breaking them down in these 5 sectors. If you're in the energy space or interested in the energy space, how do you transition from where you are to where you're supposed to be, or to where you want to be? So thank you for joining me. I hope you've learned something, and I hope that you do share your comments, your feedback, your questions in the comment section below, and I'd be happy to answer, respond, engage, and keep this conversation going and help as many young people as possible to get into the green economy, because that is our mission. 30 million jobs in the African green economy by 2033. Whether directly created or catalyzed, that is our mission. My name is Sellah Bogonko, co-founder and CEO of Jacob's Ladder Africa, and this is Green Jobs Africa.